Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Freely. So in today's video, we're going to be going through the 4K in the Canon M50. We're going to be kind of going more deep into the 4K of what it can do, its limitations, and some pros and cons. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, I'm Freely and I make videos all about cameras, including video tutorials and reviews with a main focus on the Canon M50, but not limited to that. If any of that interests you, consider subscribing and hit that notification bell. So first off, I'm going to talk about the most important points about the 4K and what you need to know. So the first thing you gotta know about the 4K is that it has a 1.6 crop whenever you're shooting in 4K. So if you don't know exactly what that means, I'm gonna kind of explain it very simply in the way that you can fully understand it when I'm talking about it. So right now I'm shooting 24 frames a second at 1080p, and just take note of the framing right now. You can see my Link amiibos right here. But I'm gonna switch to 4K right now. And as you can see, the frame got a lot more cramped, right? You can barely see the other Link now. You can only see this Link amiibo. But I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is that 1.6 crop is cropping in your image. So right now I'm using the kit lens that comes with the M50, which is a 15 to 45 millimeter. So when I say that 1.6 crop, you're taking that focal length, for example 15 millimeters, and you're multiplying 15 millimeters by 1.6, which is 24. So currently right now, even though I'm currently at the 15 millimeter focal length, that 1.6 crop in 4K will technically make this a 24 millimeter. So right now you're kind of seeing what 24 millimeters would look like. So that's just a quick rundown on the 1.6 crop. Hopefully you guys can see the difference. Alright, this is a lot better. I have a lot more room. It's not so claustrophobic around here. So the second point for the 4K is that the autofocus is going to be contrast detection. So right now I'm currently shooting in 1080p, and that resolution has access to the dual pixel autofocus that is so famous with Canon cameras, which is very accurate and it's really tracking your face really well. So that's why my face is always in focus. But when you switch over to the 4K mode, it changes to the contrast detection autofocus. So how contrast detection works, it's just in the name, it's just trying to find high contrast. So this introduces some issues. If you're inside an environment where there's very low contrast and everything kind of blends in with each other, the contrast detection is going to have a very hard time getting a lock on your face. Like right now I'm looking at the flip out screen on the M50 and there's like a box that's following me wherever I go. You'll have that in the 4K, but it won't necessarily be as accurate as the dual pixel autofocus. So that's just something you have to take into account when you're shooting in 4K. The 1.6 crop and the autofocus is now contrast detection, therefore a little less accurate than the dual pixel autofocus. If you guys want more tips on how to use the autofocus in 4K, I'll leave a link in the card and the description. It shoots in 24 frames a second or 25 frames for PAL regions. And lastly, the one other thing you can do in 4K is 4K time-lapse mode. So I made a whole tutorial on how to do time lapses on the Canon M50, but I didn't really cover the 4K section of it. It's basically the same. You also have to take into account the 1.6 crop when you're doing time lapses, but essentially it's the same. It's just time lapse, but in 4K. So looking at a lot of questions on the Canon M50 question and answers board, I find that a lot of people are wondering how long does the battery last when you're shooting in 4K. And I did a little bit of my own testing to find out how long it actually lasts shooting in 4K. So to test this, I kind of just hit record while in 4K on my Canon M50 and took note of how long it lasted. So I was testing with the regular Canon first party battery along with the battery grip. And to my surprise, it was able to reach that 29 minute and 59 second limit when recording video. So for regular batteries, I'd have to estimate that it probably can last around 3 to 4 hours. I don't have an exact time limit, but I would have to say that around 3 to 4 hours is how long you can record while shooting in 4K, because it does take a little bit more battery because you're constructing such a big file. While we're on the topic of files, there's a 4 GB limit per file. So like say you're recording a video in 4K and that file that you're recording reaches about 4 GB, it'll split that file into 2 different files. So you'll have one 4 GB file that's about 4 minutes, and you'll have a second file that starts building up from there, and eventually that will split at the 4GB mark. Although when I was testing this, for some reason the camera was not splitting those files at 4GB. I was able to record a almost 30-minute video in 4K that was 25GB big, and it was just one file. So I don't know what happened. I couldn't replicate it, but I have two files on my laptop that are 25GB each. I don't know what caused that, but I was able to do it, but I wasn't able to replicate that, so it might have just been some anomaly. So let's get back on track. The regular Canon first party battery will last you probably around 3 to 4 hours if you're recording in 4K, and contrast that to the Canon M50 battery grip. It uses a much bigger battery and extends the battery life of the Canon M50 way longer than it should be. I'd estimate that the Canon M50 battery grip can probably double or even triple that time. So if you're looking at about 3 to 4 hours on a regular battery, you can just take that number and multiply it by 2 or 3, and you probably have an all-day battery shooting in 4K. So keep in mind, these are just rough estimates, but those are around the numbers that I was able to get, so your numbers may look a little bit different from mine. So now we're kind of gonna go into the pros and cons of the 4K in the Canon M50. So first off, one of the 4K in the Canon M50 Pros is that it gives you the ability to really crop in. I made a whole video talking about this topic. It's a very short video, so you should check it out in the card. So say you want to record something, but it's like really far away. So what you can do is switch it into 4K, and since it has that 1.6 crop, you can take advantage of that, and then maybe you could have like a 45mm, and then with that 1.6 crop it becomes a 72mm. So it allows you to get really close to a subject without having to switch the lens or even really physically move. So I think it's really cool just to have that option. But unfortunately, that's where the pros end for the 4K. Now, these are kind of my opinion on the pros and cons, so if you guys agree with me, then great. If you don't, great, it's your opinion. But for the list of cons for the 4K, the first one being no dual pixel autofocus. This is kind of self-explanatory. Autofocus is very important. As you can see, you want to keep subject spaces in focus, but the 4K just doesn't have that. Again, if you just really want to use the 4K, I have some tips on how to get some good autofocus while you're shooting in 4K, so be sure to check that out. But the dual pixel autofocus in Canon cameras is just so great, and it's sad to not see it in the 4K. So the second thing on my list in terms of cons for the 4K is going to be rolling shutter. So if you don't know what rolling shutter is, I'll show you right now. I'm gonna switch to 4K. So currently I'm in 4K, as you can tell. It's very cropped in, you can see my face. But rolling shutter is essentially this. You see how my you see how everything kind of looks like jelly? Everything kind of just like gets pulled in away, and it kind of looks like jelly, like that. I don't know if you can really see that, but see my head, it kind of becomes like a jelly. That's essentially what rolling shutter is. And I don't know, for me, I kind of just don't like the look of rolling shutter, because if you're just recording and you're kind of just doing your thing, and then you just kind of like whip it slightly, or I don't know, it just, you do something very erratic, you just see that rolling shutter. I just don't like the look of it. So that's just one thing to keep note of in the 4K. So the third thing on my list is, like I said earlier, the crop factor. It crops in 1.6 times, so it's not really something I would use on the daily. As you're seeing right now, I'm shooting in 4K, but it's just a very small image. Like, I just don't have room right here compared to the 1080, where there's just a lot more frame. I just kind of like more room, and I don't like having it cropped down so much. I'm currently at 15mm, and it makes it look like I'm shooting at 24, so I kind of just want more wider focal lengths. And last on my list is no log profile. So if you're familiar with cameras, basically a log profile, it makes an image that's very unsaturated. But then what's really great with that, it really gives you more control over the colors of the image, and that's kind of more advanced, but I don't really mess with that either, but I know a lot of people do. But for a beginner camera like the Canon M50, it's really something that doesn't bother me, and I think will not bother a lot of people just getting into filmmaking and just making videos for YouTube. So with all those cons I just mentioned, I think it's still cool to have 4K on this camera. I think it's really good for people just to get their feet wet with 4K, learning how to use it in their workflow, learning how big 4K files actually are, and how to deal with how the look of those images look. I guess just to get familiar with the 4K look and the 4K, I guess, workflow. I think it's really cool just to have it. So in my opinion, I think the best use cases for the 4K in the Canon M50 is if you're shooting in environments that you have total control of. So if you're in environments where you just can't control anything that's going on, and I wouldn't recommend using 4K. For example, in this kind of setting where I have total control over the lighting and kind of like my framing. I currently have my camera on the tripod, so I have very high control in this image and in this environment. So it allows me to really make use of the 4K because it allows me to choose exactly where I want my focus or how I want my lighting and whatnot. So I think it's really good for very controlled environments, but I also think it's really good for B-roll. So if you're trying to get some B-roll shots in your video, it'd be really cool to have a 4K video with super high definition in your videos. So yeah, the best use cases in my opinion are in places where you have high control over your environment and for B-roll for your videos. And I just want to mention to you guys that these are kind of like my opinions about the 4K. If you guys agree with me, then great, leave a like on the video. But if you guys don't agree with me, tell me why in the comments below. But also like that video because I just want to know all your guys' thoughts. But anyways, hope you guys got some value from this video and hope you guys learned something new about that 4K in the Canon M50, and hopefully you guys can apply some of the tips I mentioned in this video in your guys' video. Once again, if you guys want to know more tips on how to use the Canon M50's autofocus, be sure to check the description. Pretty cool because I was in Hawaii when I recorded that, so you'll see a little bit of Hawaii. Question of the day: have you used the 4K in the Canon M50? Do you use it on a regular basis? Just let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys want more videos just like this, consider subscribing and hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm. With all that said, thank you guys for watching. Once again, I said thank you guys for watching like 3 times. Woo! I'll see you guys in the next one.